We are flesh and blood, so they say, but at the same time we consume a lot of these substances as animal protein, mostly in the form of meat, except for our vegetarian, vegan and herbivorous friends. Some of us find meat consumption controversial and stop eating it. There are people who don't have access to meat because of financial or logistical reasons. In the modern world, there are 1.5 billion people who are not vegetarian by choice and have no access to meat products. Our religion may also affect our diet. But it looks like most of us can't resist the delicious smell of steak and meat dishes. So eating animals is the norm almost everywhere. This video series will describe our inseparable relation with meat through time and space, and look for solutions that may change our habits forever. Let's start our meat journey with the Roman Empire. The Romans rarely roasted their meat on charcoal for eating purposes. They favored frying methods like stewing. They had a taste for rich and well-cooked food, sweet and sour sauces made of honey, fruits, vinegar, garum, which is a fermented fish sauce, seasoned with herbs and spices. Cooking methods using a pan symbolized refinement, culture and wealth, so it was not by accident that the smoke and blood were reserved for the gods. The smells of burning beef filled the fora during the numerous gatherings in Rome. One such gathering was Forticidia, a festival of fertility and animal husbandry, held in the middle of April. It involved the sacrifice of pregnant cow to Tellus, the ancient Roman goddess of the earth. Despite the smelly streets, ancient Romans are widely admired for what appears to be an enormous commitment to hygiene and public health. We know they built vast sewer systems such as the Cloaca Maxima in Rome, and the gleaming Roman baths tourists still visit today. Although research has revealed that the cloaca and other city sewer systems weren't constructed primarily for the removal of human waste. They were used to drain water that pooled on uneven streets or filled low-lying areas after river floods. This discovery altogether paints a more nuanced picture of the Romans' perspective on health and sanitation. Anyway, moving on and not forgetting our main theme, we arrive in Byzantine times, where meat was probably not a luxury food. Most people could afford to eat some kind of animal protein relatively often. Both inland and coastal Byzantine population consumed an essentially land-based diet. Significant amount of meat and possibly some plants. The typical domesticated animals in these times were sheep, goat, cattle, buffalo and pig. We keep going and arriving in medieval times, where meat became the central part of the meal. They served it roasted or boiled. Though it wasn't available in abundance everywhere, a study at Cambridge University looked at the skeletal remains of more than 2,000 people in England from the 5th to the 11th century. They excavated the graves and found no evidence that suggests difference between social classes. Isotopic examination showed that diets in this period were much more similar across social groups, and it did not include that much meat. So we should imagine a wide range of people eating bread with cheese and sometimes with meat, or whatever they could get their hands on. The lack of difference between the cuisine of classes may be due to the availability of limited resources for the whole of society. It seems none was able to get or buy enough food in Anglo-Saxon England. A little bit later in time, on the south side of Europe, in Catalonia, we have a great place to look for records about animals kept for eating in the 15th century. The text records from 1462 show vigorous amounts of meat consumption per capita in Barcelona. In the city, each animal was taxed. More than 2/3 of the meat was sheep, representing over 40,000 animals, while cattle were just over 10%, representing almost 5,800 animals, and the remaining 11,600 animals were pigs. Altogether, there were roughly 57,400 animals in total which were brought into the city to be consumed. That means eating around 126 kg or approximately 280 pounds of meat per person per year, making the average daily consumption 0.3 kg or 12 ounces per capita. In comparison, by 2018, a study shows that the Spanish ate 4.5 ounces of meat per day on average, which was still higher than the European median. During the 17th and 18th centuries, meat consumption increased steadily in Europe. This was due to various factors such as increasing population, improved agricultural practices, and the availability of more meat sources. However, meat was still considered a luxury and was consumed primarily by the wealthy. In the early modern times, meat was used as a tool for displaying status. In the beginning of the 19th century, the industrial revolution led to increased production of transportation. Because of that, meat consumption continued to rise. The working classes also began to consume more meat as it became more affordable. By the mid-19th century, eating meat had become a regular part of the diet for many people in Europe and North America, as it is still today. It looks like we don't want to give up our tasty habit. We cannot really predict what will happen in the future. All we can see is a steady growth in meat consumption as time goes by. However, how much meat you ate was widely dependent on factors such as location, social class, and general availability of meat. So, we see the trend, more and more meat for everyone. But what exactly on our plates and how does it get there? Now let's look into some important factors that led to our modern meat consumption and industrialized practices. Meat production has evolved over time and it's influenced by a range of factors such as technology, economics, and culture. In the beginning, the only way to get meat was from hunting, usually with spears and arrows, in the company of our family and friends from the tribe. And on better days, with Fortuna on our side. To be chronologically precise, she joined the group a few thousand years later. So after domesticating animals around 10,000 years ago, humans began to raise animals such as cattle, sheep, and pigs. This allowed for a more reliable source of meat and also enabled us to control the breeding and growth of animals.
To ensure quality for the benefit of the consumer, federal inspectors examine and certify each carcass at the packing plant.
In order to get the meat, we had to develop various methods for slaughtering. In some cultures, rituals are performed before and during the slaughter to honor the animal and ensure that the meat is safe to consume. After slaughtering, the animal must be butchered to separate the meat from the bones and other parts. This also has a cultural aspect. For example, the halal cut in Muslim countries, or the kosher meat production within the Jewish culture. Meat production has been an important aspect of many civilizations throughout history, and traditions connected to it vary widely across different regions of the earth. In some cultures, meat is considered a luxury food and is only consumed on special occasions, while in others it is a staple of everyday diet. Around the world, we developed our culinary taste in different ways. For example, in Argentina, beef is a central part of the national cuisine, and the country is known for its high-quality grass-fed beef. Asado, a traditional Argentine barbecue, is a popular social event that involves grilling cuts of beef over an open flame. In the Middle East, lamb is a popular meat that is often prepared in stews and grilled dishes. In Japan, the consumption of raw fish and meat is a traditional part of the diet, and is often served in dishes such as sushi and sashimi. In Korean culture, meat is often marinated in a variety of spices and sauces before grilling, and is typically served with a variety of side dishes. Indigenous cultures of Arctic in some Greenlandic tribes, hunting and consuming meat from marine mammals such as seals and whales is an important part of culture and of survival. These practices have been threatened by environmental changes, such as loss of the sea ice and the impact of climate change. In many Western countries, meat consumption has traditionally been associated with masculinity and strength. This is reflected in cultural symbols, such as the cowboy, who is often depicted as a rugged individualist who relies on beef for sustenance. In the US, people eat 264 pounds or 119 kilograms of meat on a yearly average. This is slightly more than the European frontrunner Luxembourg, with 108 kilograms or 238 pounds of meat, followed by Austria's hefty amount of 102 kilograms or 225 pounds. In the third place, Spain with 97 kilograms or 214 pounds. Also, let's not forget about Denmark, Portugal, Italy, Slovenia, Germany, Ireland and France. These countries are the big meat eaters in Europe. The most consumed meat in the world is pork, followed by the poultry, beef and lamb. The United States is the largest exporter of beef in the world, followed by Brazil and Australia. These cultural aspects evolved mostly because of the natural resources, geography and religion. Throughout history, humanity developed different methods to preserve meat, such as salting, smoking, and drying. These methods allowed meat to be stored to longer periods of time and were essential for survival in times of scarcity. With the rise of agriculture and trade networks, meat became a valuable commodity that was traded over long distances. This led to specialized markets and the industrialization of meat production. With large-scale factory farms and processing plants, the meat industry has become more efficient and is able to reduce the cost of production, but leave concerns about the animal welfare and environmental impact. Our modern agriculture is teeming with exhaustive crop growing techniques, and we adopted that to our husbandry, to using up more land every day to keep our animals. The industry has a significant environmental impact, with concerns about deforestation, greenhouse gas emission and water usage. All this has led to a growing focus on sustainable farming and cattle keeping, such as grass-fed beef and regenerative agriculture. Overall, our attitude to meat production in modern times is shaped by a complex connection of economic, environmental and cultural factors, as well as concerns about health and animal welfare. It's a fact that the meat industry could use fewer harmful substances during production, and we have concerns around animal welfare and the human health aspect. We always want to solve the puzzle and try out different solutions, like the animal-free meat grown in labs, which is a promising solution regarding the environmental impact and all the animal-related problems we have in meat production nowadays. However, there are some questionable moves behind cultured meat. The big investments in this area are mostly for intellectual property. Who owns the rights for production? And this question can easily lead to a monopolized market situation that can affect or have an impact on health studies related to artificial meat issues, because lobby power could manipulate the overall results of these studies, as we have seen it in the past. We cannot really question that the lab-grown meat could significantly reduce the environmental footprint of the meat industry, but there is a long way to go. We need technological advancement to improve scalability and reduce cost, and we have to gain more transparency. What many experts agree on is that the current levels of meat production and consumption are not sustainable in the long term. There are numerous reasons for this. Meat production has a great ecological impact, including the loss of forests and the waste of water. As the global population continues to grow and become more affluent, the demand for meat is likely to increase, putting further strain on these resources. The current meat production system heavily relies on intensive farming practices that prioritize speed and efficiency over animals' well-being. This has led to concerns about animal welfare and has prompted calls for more sustainable and ethical meat production practices. Only this could ensure a long-term viability of the industry. And how could it be done? Perhaps with a shift towards more plant-based diets? Or with the development of alternative meat sources such as lab-grown meat? Maybe with the adoption of more sustainable farming practices such as regenerative farming. The future of meat production and consumption is a complex and evolving issue, and it will depend on a range of factors, including technological innovation, changes in consumer behavior, and global economic and environmental trends. In developed countries, different vegetarian diets were gaining ground a long time ago. Of course, not long as in India, but the concept of vegetarianism first appeared in Europe during the Renaissance, and this idea was raised for ethical reasons, rather than as a healthy diet that is easier to maintain. The development of plant-based meat technologies seems to reinforce this trend today. On the other hand, developing countries have a great potential for economic growth, and this will bring more consumers to the market, since most of the world's population belongs to it, is more likely to increase the global need for meat. What the industry should definitely reconsider is the overuse of antibiotics. We treat ourselves with them, but using too much can be backfire, with possibly fatal effects. In industrial livestock production, they are not being used carefully enough. The COVID-19 crisis was a vivid example of how imminent threat of their own life can change people's thinking and behavior. The whole globe lived through an era of uncertainty. In the beginning, we didn't know if there was to be a cure, and our concerns did not end with the arrival of vaccines. This other, less visible global health crisis caused by bacteria resistant to antibiotics is already killing 700,000 people a year. The cause? Overused and wrongly applied medicine, which lose their effectiveness as germs become resistant to them. As opposed to COVID-19, the average citizen cannot do anything about it. It is absolutely due to large-scale farming, where animals are jammed in tiny spaces. And to avoid the spread of diseases, they are fed medicine. 73% of antibiotics sold worldwide are used on animals only. There is a rise every year in the global market for veterinary medicine, 5–6% each year. Researchers expect a significant 67% increase in the antibiotics use for livestock between 2010 and 30. Bacteria are constantly adapting. They develop genes for resistance, and they can pass these on to other bacteria, even from one species to another. That is especially a problem for zoonoses, pathogens that can infect both animals and humans, which can transfer resistance from the animal kingdom into the human body. Resistance in livestock farms has increased remarkably since the turn of the millennium in many countries. Parts of China and India are currently in the lead, but the numbers in Brazil and Kenya are also rising quickly. The inappropriate use of antibiotics in livestock is increasingly threatening the effectiveness in humans. That is because in animal husbandry, the bacteria develop resistance against the same antibiotics that are routinely used to treat infectious diseases in humans. The use of so-called highest priority critically important antibiotics, in short form HPCIAs, poses special problems. The World Health Organization recommends that these emergency antibiotics should be reserved for use in humans for cases where other antibiotics are ineffective. According to a study by the non-governmental organization Germanwatch, antibiotic-resistant pathogens were found in 51% of chicken samples from major poultry producers in 5 EU countries. Some 35% of the laboratory samples even had pathogens that were resistant to HPCIAs, and which could therefore render these last-ditch remedies ineffective. Meat from the poultry industry drags the resistant pathogens into the food chain and therefore into customers' kitchen. Humans could pick up multi-resistant pathogens while preparing or eating contaminated meat. The resistant microbes may cause severe infections against which hardly any antibiotics are effective. What can we do to avoid it? Try to buy meat from reliable sources.
Then the next time you go to the meat counter, be sure you look for the purple shield-shaped grade stamp on the meat that you buy as your assurance of quality.
After that not so promising picture about antibiotics, let's move forward to another branch of infamous chemicals, pesticides. The worldwide use of pesticides has doubled since the 90s, with over 4 million tons of active ingredients now applied every year to control weeds, insects and other plant pests. While their applications have stagnated in many parts of the European Union over the last 30 years, they have increased sharply elsewhere in the world. The increase results partly from the rising global demand for meat. This in turn stimulates the demand for protein-rich feed made from soybeans, the main producer of which are the USA, Brazil and Argentina. These three countries are among the world's biggest pesticide users. The figures for China are contradictory. The country's statistics office has given the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations a figure of 1.7 million tons, over 40% of global consumption. But an official Chinese specialized authority reports just 300,000 tons. It is unclear if the two numbers can be compared. Regarding herbicides, which are used to control weeds, the USA uses more than 250,000 tons, Brazil nearly 230,000 tons, Argentina 161,000 tons. Together that is nearly 70% of the global reported consumption of these chemicals. The rise in pesticide consumption in Brazil and Argentina is linked to the introduction of genetically modified soybeans at the end of the 90s. These plants are resistant to glyphosate, a broad-spectrum systemic herbicide. Glyphosate can be sprayed on soybeans while they are growing in the field to destroy any weeds that compete with the crop. But the more glyphosate is applied, the more likely is that the weeds will become resistant to the spray, forcing farmers to spray even more and to use different types of weed killers too. So we are in the same vicious circle with antibiotics and pesticides. Those who use them have to be careful how and how much to use, because otherwise there could be serious consequences. Since we just started here on YouTube, you can do us a big favor by subscribing to our channel. Thank you. That was part 1 of our meat journey. You can see the second part in the next video.